What is my perfect crime? I break into Tiffany's at midnight. Do I go for the vault? No, I go for the chandelier. It's priceless. As I'm taking it down, a woman catches me. She tells me to stop. It's her father's business. She's Tiffany. I say no. We make love all night. In the morning, the cops come and I escape in one of their uniforms. I tell her to meet me in Mexico, but I go to Canada. I don't trust her. Besides, I like the cold. 30 years later, I get a postcard. I have a son, and he's the chief of police. This is where the story gets interesting. I tell Tiffany to meet me in Paris by the Trocadero. She's been waiting for me all these years. She's never taken another lover. I don't care. I don't show up. I go to Berlin. That's where I stashed the chandelier.
This is why you should always trust your gut. In the early 1970s, a college student decided to hitchhike his way home after class. A car pulls up, a man offers him a ride, and he climbs in. As soon as the car started moving, the student felt totally uneasy, like something was wrong but he couldn't quite place it. Without saying anything, he waited till the next time they slowed down and he flung the door open and ran away. 2 years later, he's flicking through TV channels when he comes across this special interview with a death row inmate. And it's just the audio recording, so he hears the interviewer ask the inmate, "Why did you remove all the door handles inside of your car?" The man just goes, "Well, the first time I tried to kill someone, I picked up a college hitchhiker who got smart at some point and jumped out of my car. So, lesson learned, remove all the door handles." When they showed his picture, the student knew immediately that he was supposed to be the first victim of John Wayne Gacy, aka the Killer Clown, who had killed over 30 men and boys in his clown room and stuffed them into his basement. This is why you should always trust your gut. In the 1970s, a young couple decided to go for a late-night hike in the woods. A couple minutes into their walk, and the man remembers thinking, something's not right. He tells his girlfriend, but they just decide to ignore it and keep going, until he steps on something that felt really soft, like it was alive. Before he has a chance to see what he stepped on, they hear all this rustling in the bushes next to them, and they bolt. Years later, that couple turns on the TV, and a death row inmate who's about to be executed is being interviewed. And they ask him, "Was there ever a time that you were almost caught red-handed?" He responded, "Yes, one time. I was in the woods, and a couple walked through, and the man actually stepped on the body of a girl I had just killed. I was hiding in the bushes just a few feet away. They didn't see me." That couple had run into one of the worst serial killers of all time, Ted Bundy. This is why you should always trust your parents. In 1990, a father and his 15-year-old son worked together at a gas station in Florida. One night, the boy was sitting outside on a break when he saw a crazy-looking woman walking towards the store. They were in a high-crime area and it was very late, so the boy turns around to look through the glass at his dad to see what he should do. His dad took one look at the woman and just shook his head, "No, do not help her." The woman walks up to the boy and says, "Hey, my car's broken down, can you give me a ride?" Before the boy can answer, his dad bursts outside and says, "You need to leave here immediately." Angrily, the woman turns and leaves, cussing them both out the whole way. 1 year later, the boy's in his room at home when his dad calls from the other room and says, "You gotta come in here and look at the TV." On the screen was the same woman from the gas station. Better known as Eileen Wuornos, she was a serial killer who used to pick up her male victims at gas stations in Florida. She was later put to death. This is why you never go to the well on your own. In 1983, a young boy was camping with his family on Roan Mountain in North Carolina when his mom asked him to head on down the path and get some water from the well. When the boy didn't return, his mom went to check on him and he was gone. A massive search party was launched to find him, but with temperatures rapidly dropping and finding no trace of him, the family braced for the worst. Then, miraculously, on the 7th day of the search, the boy shows up on the mountaintop in an area they had already searched, healthy and clean. When they asked the boy, "Where have you been?" he said he had been at the well when a tall, faceless man showed up behind him, scooped him up, and brought him to the top of the mountain where he kept him in his cabin all week. After the boy gave a very detailed description of exactly where this cabin was on the mountain, the police were eager to go find it and confront this guy. But the park superintendent just raised his hand and said, "Guys, it's pointless. I've worked here 40 years. There are no cabins on Roan Mountain." This is what they meant when they said, "Don't talk to strangers." In the early 1900s, a 10-year-old boy was playing in the woods when a tall man appeared and asked if he wanted to come back to his cabin for dinner. Totally caught off guard, the boy reluctantly agrees and begins walking. When they get to the cabin, the boy is relieved when he sees Paul, a family friend, sitting on the porch, so the boy happily goes inside. After they eat, the boy says thank you to the strange tall man, says bye to Paul, and then he leaves. He had only walked a few steps when he sees his family, along with Paul, running up the path towards him, frantically asking if he was okay. Confused, the boy says, "I'm just fine," and he looks at Paul and he's like, "Why didn't you tell them I was with you at the cabin?" And he points over his shoulder. Paul glances over the boy's shoulder and then narrows his eyes and says, "You were kidnapped by a cult 3 days ago. No one's seen you." Terrified, the boy turns around to look at the cabin he just came from, and it's gone. All he sees is a dark forest that stretches for miles. This is why you should never explore abandoned ships. In 2014, the US Navy decided to decommission one of its oldest ships, so it brought it into port to be broken down for scrap. Before workers were allowed to actually start breaking it down, the foreman had to go on board and take pictures of every room. So late one night, the foreman spends about an hour walking through this abandoned ship with a flashlight, taking about 100 pictures. When he was done, he emailed the pictures to his boss, who quickly wrote back, "Who's the guy with the axe?" The foreman had no idea what he was talking about, but he noticed the boss had attached one of the pictures that he had just sent him. When he opened it, he nearly fainted. There, in the bowels of the ship, poking his head around a corner, was a faceless man wielding an axe. The foreman had spent over an hour in this hallway and never heard or saw this guy. The Navy searched the ship and never found this guy. They also reviewed security footage of the only entrance, and he never entered or left the ship. This is why you should always lock your doors. A junior in high school was home alone working on a paper while his parents were out to dinner. All night he sits with his back to his door, sitting at his desk with his noise-canceling headphones on. Around 11 o'clock, he takes his headphones off at the same time his parents are returning to the house, and he hears his mom from downstairs yell, "Hey Adrian, what happened?" Confused, he runs downstairs and sees right away what she's looking at: muddy footprints all over the rug. He tells her, "I didn't leave my desk." And then they realize someone must have broken in. They look at the footprints and there's none leaving the house. They're worried someone's still in the house, so they run into the garage, terrified, call the police. Police arrive and they don't find anyone in the house, but they do make a chilling discovery upstairs. The police bring them to the kid's bedroom door, which had been left open all night, and they point to the message written on it in Sharpie. This is the actual transcript of what was written on his door, which means for nearly 2 hours, someone stood in this kid's doorway watching him. This is why you should never eat a cult's applesauce. During his stay in a psych ward in the 1970s, Marshall Applewhite formed an intense, non-romantic relationship with his nurse, Bonnie Nettles. They quickly realized aliens had preordained their encounter, and now they needed to board their spacecraft once the aliens came back to Earth to give them the signal. The pair formed a cult called Heaven's Gate, and they recruited people by telling them if they missed this one UFO ride, they would be destroyed when the Earth was inevitably recycled. Their cult was considered a joke and not a threat until they did something so horrific it shocked the world. On March 26, 1997, the aliens were going to be passing overhead, hiding behind a comet, and it was now time for the members to hop on board. Over the course of 3 days, members donned matching Nike sneakers, ate poisoned applesauce, tied bags over their head, and then waited to exit the Earth. Right before they died, they conducted exit interviews, and they are truly disturbing. To see these interviews and learn more about the cult of cults, check out Heaven's Gate. This is why you should always sleep with your lights on. In 1991, a man named Christopher Case was found dead in his bathtub, fully clothed in the fetal position. When police interviewed his best friend Sammy, she told them about a very disturbing phone call she got from him the night before he died. On the call, he told her that the previous night he had woken up to what sounded like whispering coming from underneath his bed. When he went to look, he couldn't move. As he laid helplessly, he watched a black figure pull itself out from underneath his bed. Once it was fully upright, it reached down and began choking him until he passed out. The next morning when he came to, he felt his neck and it was swollen and bruised. And then he saw blood on his hands and he saw that there were deep, uniform incisions on each of his fingertips. As he's saying all this to Sammy and telling her how scared he is to go to bed that night, he suddenly stops and he says, "I hear whispering outside my room." Then the phone went dead.